people who review movies on YouTube have a special smell. Let's talk about Parasite.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're doing a little bit of a twist to the Sunday reviews that we do on the Have You Seen series. And the reason for it is the Times put out their 100 best movies of the 21st century, and they ranked Parasite as number one. So, I hadn't seen it. Daniel, I know you've seen it previously. Do you want to give the people a synopsis of the movie, and then we can get into our discussion of it and whether it actually is the greatest movie of the 21st century?
So I had seen it once before, about 2 years ago, but as I was watching it again to prepare for this, I realized that something was up, and what it ended up being was that I had seen the German dubbing 2 years ago, and some of the like I was ready for to do better with this one, right? Because I think on my on my first viewing, I had some really big story problems with this movie, and basically said, look, there are just a couple of key points in this that just completely break the story, and I don't get why everybody kind of just overlooks that. And then I watched it in the official Korean version with the official English subtitles on Netflix, and then I said, oh, the German dubbing screwed up. Like they left out some really key details. They're small, but that really like changed the interpretation of the story. And now I'm much more positive on it. So before we dive in, so just for context in terms of how well I know this movie, I've basically seen it twice. I had some strong opinions that kind of got thrown in the bin as I watched it again yesterday. So I have fairly fresh opinions about this movie. So before we jump in, the basic story of it is Parasite is a 2019 South Korean black comedy movie about a poor family who are barely scraping by, and through chance, their son gets a chance to tutor the daughter of a rich family in English. And this goes really well, and one thing leads to another, and before they know it, all members of the family, his sister and his both of his parents, have taken jobs in their family, essentially having attached themselves to this very wealthy family, who live lives that are completely different than theirs, and things kind of proceed and escalate from there. So, what did you think of Parasite?
So I think this is actually a really good movie. It's actually a great movie. It's well made both on the narrative level, on the storytelling level, and also it's done well in its messaging as well. And I think there's a lot of themes and there's a lot of sub messages within this. And again, this is just my first viewing, so I didn't pick up on absolutely everything. And I know that there's going to be a lot of stuff that is looked past or missed in our discussion that was there in the movie, but from initial viewing, I could just recognize how well the story played out, as well as a lot of like the subtleness to the way that the film was directed, a lot of the subtleness to the way that you know sequences played out and how it was shot, etc. There were like a few moments in the story, and I think this is just like with movies, you kind of have to accept that there are some leaps that might happen, and I know they try to make it make sense in the movie, but there were just like a few like dumb character decisions in this. I was a bit like, okay, what? Like, why are we doing it like this, and like how is it playing out the way it does? But I think they do it just to add to the commentary that they're trying to make, and we'll get into like some of the specific examples in the review as well. But like overall, very very likable, very engaging characters in this story. It's got a really good first half of the movie where you're fully along the ride with some of this character, this family, their dynamic, and the way that they're latching themselves onto the rich family. And then it goes into a place where I didn't see coming because like I hadn't seen any trailers, hadn't seen anything about the story, how it plays out, etc. So it took a complete turn directly at the midpoint of the movie, and I was like, okay, we're heading there. And I think I enjoyed the first half a little bit more than the second half of the movie, but the second half of the movie was still really good, really strong, with a bit of a weird ending that I don't know whether I do like or I don't like. But I think overall, great movie. really well made movie, really well directed, really well acted. I think it's a, you know, I can definitely see why it would be ranked high amongst some of the best movies that have come out in the 21st century. Maybe not my number one. I probably wouldn't take my number one, and that's all subjective opinions. But I can definitely see why someone would have it so high up in the list.
Yeah, for me, like I absolutely do think it's a really well made movie in terms of just how it's shot, how its characters are characterized, all the different symbolism that which I picked up a whole bunch more in the second viewing than the first one. So maybe we can talk about that as well. The movie tries, I think, it tries to be I think it's made for international audiences, and famously the translation makes some changes where they swap out Korean terms for more generic terms, which has been, like, among fans of this movie, has been a little bit controversial. And I'm not sure if all of those are necessary, but the point is the movie is made for an international audience, and it tries to be accessible. Like, there's not much you have to know about Korea to kind of appreciate this movie, but there are a few things in there that are not really explained, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch that I didn't get. But I think the characters are well characterized. You know who everyone is. Everybody has a personality. Generally, people make choices mostly like you know why they make those choices. I think there's just a lot of very deliberate symbolism in this that for the most part does not get in the way. So a lot of the time, I don't really like symbolism if it doesn't like touch on the character and story level, where it's something that kind of floats above the story and it's just there because the director wants to wink at the camera and the audience kind of feels smart for having noticed it. Like, that kind of symbolism in a movie is not something I really like. And but there's another kind of symbolism which is more about, like, the actual action and the character choices still make sense, but there are connotations and subtext to it based on the symbolism that inform what's going on. But the literal sequence of events still makes sense. And almost all of what's going on in this movie is the second part of the symbolism, I think. And I think that is what makes it so strong, is that you don't have to get very much of the symbolism to just follow the story. And then the more of it you pick up on, the richer it is, I think. So before we move on, what does the Times say? Why is this a good movie?
In the Times, again, they were counting down from 100 to 1, so it's just a short paragraph from them, but they say, a tale of haves and have nots, and a ferocious rebuke to the devastation of neoliberalism. Bong Joon Ho's pleasurably kinked and unsettling shocker follows a destitute family as it insinuates itself into a wealthy household. Bong, a master of genre unbound by convention, fluidly shifts between broad comedy and blistering social satire throughout. Then lights it all on fire with paroxysm, if I'm saying that correctly, of tragic violence that's as stunning as it is inevitable. When the movie opened in the United States, Bong was a favorite on the art house circuit. By the time it closed, he had a fistful of Oscars, including Best Picture, and the world had a new superstar. So it doesn't really get into the ins and outs as to why they rate it so highly. And again, I think that's just a case of just providing a little bit of context to each of the movies that it had in its list, which I think is actually it's actually a little bit annoying because if you're gonna have it as your number one, it'd be good to know a little bit more than that why you have it as your number one ranked above all the other movies. Especially if if you're entering your top 10, we kind of need to know what it is about these movies that make it so special and make it so different from other movies that have come out, because there's a plethora of movies that have come out in the 21st century, ranging from amazing to absolutely, dog poo, or absolutely trash. So it would have been good to know a little bit more as to why they ranked it so highly, but that's all they had to say on it.
Yeah, and that's one of those things. Like, I really dislike movie critics, which might come as a shock since we've been doing this for a year and a half. But there's like a very specific type of movie critic that mostly wants to use movies as a vehicle to talk about their personal politics, right? And they will celebrate movies based on, or condemn them on the basis of whether or not they agree with them. And the discourse surrounding Parasite is very much like this, right? Like what you just quoted. Like, I have my I have some opinions about whether this movie actually like skewers neoliberalism or something or whatever. And the Wikipedia page is full of quotes about how this is about late stage capitalism and how and all sorts of things, right? Which I do not agree with. What it is very much a story about so. But at the same time, this movie is very much like it does in fact have a lot to say about things like inequality and about poverty and about the importance of money and class and social hierarchies and all sorts of things, right? And I think it's actually much smarter and much better than its supporters would suggest. And that includes the director, right? Like at some point, like when you read like the quotes from the director, from Bong Joon Ho, it's like it does not the quotes, maybe, and maybe this is translation or whatever. I don't know the guy. I don't know if he's being quoted from like if he's speaking in Korean and this is being translated, or whether what I mean. Like I don't know, but like when I compare quotes I see from him and what's actually in the movie, those are two completely different things, and one is much more sophisticated than the other, right? So there's a whole bunch of really subtle and actually like insightful stuff in this movie that touches on things like inequality and money and that sort of thing. So the movie, like just to give one example, like one of the things, like if you talk to like people who care about like earning money not for the sake of being rich but for the sake of like having a better life, right? Like escaping poverty, that sort of thing, they will talk about how expensive it is to be poor, right? Because you basically you have to constantly build your life around what you can afford right now and what opportunities you have right now. Whereas once you have even a little bit of money, you can afford to wait for better opportunities. You don't have to take the first job you get. You don't have to buy the cheapest shoes that you have to replace after 3 months. You can buy fancy ones that last a year and like on a per month basis are cheaper, like stuff like that, right? So there are all of these things in which not having money makes your life worse. And one of the ways it does that is by making everything more expensive. And like the irony is that not having money makes everything more expensive because you don't have options. And then you have to spend so much time and energy of your life just on keeping your head above water that you don't have time and energy to do anything else. And once you have even a little bit of cushion, suddenly the world looks very different. And that, I think, is very much what this movie is about. So as an example, the movie basically starts off with they have applied, like the Kim family has applied to this job to fold pizza boxes, right, for not very much money, and they are waiting for the email telling them whether or not they've gotten the job. But to get the email, they need to have Wi-Fi, and to have Wi-Fi, they need to find the one spot in their apartment where they can tap into their neighbor's Wi-Fi who forgot to put a password on it, and then their neighbor did put a password on it, so have to find a different one who hasn't secured the network yet. And all of this is just to get an email, right? Four people are spending like several minutes of the movie just trying to get a network to see if they've got email. And that is like the first example of how difficult it is to not have money. Because if they could just afford proper internet, none of that would be an issue. It wouldn't even cost that much, right? So that is actually like nobody says this, nobody gives a big speech about this, but we are just shown how they're constantly chasing and constantly sprinting just to keep up.
And also kind of ties into the education factor as well, because they're all clearly intelligent or have some level of intelligence, the kids especially, because to be able to teach English, he would have had to have learned it up until a certain point. He would have had to have had the knowledge of it to be teaching this rich family as well, because they have all the money, they have all the resources to teach their kids English, and he's been able to do it on minimum resources. And then of course the girl as well, who I think it's like referred to that she had like some sort of involvement in like art university or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but she definitely had some type of like artistic background to her, and again was able to see patterns in the kids' drawings and the kids, the way that the kid was expressing himself on his paintings and stuff. So they clearly had a level of knowledge or a level of intelligence to them, but because of their circumstances, they had to apply it in the wrong way, in a bit more of a fraudulent way. Whereas if they had the resources, they would have been able to go to college and been able to get jobs the more legitimate way. But because of circumstances, they just had to do what they needed to do and get by the way that they had to in the movie.
Yeah, the thing with the king with Kijong about and her like her Photoshop skills. I think the idea is that first of all, the thing about the art therapy, she says at one point she Googled it for 10 minutes and then made up the rest, and the rich mom just kind of ate it up because she doesn't know anything either. But she does have real Photoshop skills, right? So she is able to forge all of these transcripts and like in confirmation of like enrollment confirmations and report cards and whatever, which is like is one of those hurdles like anybody who has like a university degree and then didn't become a lawyer or doctor knows how useless like a university degree kind of is, right? Like you don't actually use the stuff you learned. You kind of just showed that you can do it, and that's a filter for employers. But you spend like depending on what you did 3 to 5 years of your life just getting that piece of paper that said I can do this, now employ me, right? But you don't need to use the stuff you know to get it. But it's like one of those things, right? Like they don't have those credentials and as a result have to scam their way into this these jobs. But once they have them, they do them well, right? Like I think the daughter is the only one who's outright making stuff up, but all the other three are doing their jobs well, right? There's never an instance where they have to hide that they're not doing it well or where there's complaints or anything like that. Like the rich family doesn't even recognize that that they're not who they said they were, and they don't have the qualifications. I think the father really is a driver, right? And I don't know about the mom, whether she has experience in that area, but it like that whole thing about faking the credentials and only getting in based on reputation and that sort of thing. All of that is kind of one of those filters where if you're not already on the inside of that whole system, you have no way of getting in, right? And the only way they can get it, like there would have been no way for them to get these jobs through honesty, right? They had to lie. And that is the fault of the rich family, right? They like none of these requirements are actually based on merit, right?
And I was going to say as well, it's kind of funny how the mother just kind of disregarded these documents. So they went through all of the effort, anyways, to forge the documents, and she didn't even check them because he was referred to her by the previous instructor that they had, and that pretty much goes with all of the jobs that they managed to get. They were all referrals, and it was based on, okay, I know this person, and this person is of a certain status and is of a certain class, and it kind of shows almost like another sort of invisible barrier that people have, is that even when you do have the credentials, even when you do have the experience, quite often it's a case of who you know and what you know, as opposed to no, it's a case of who you know as opposed to what you know, because he could have very well had the right level of education and the right sort of certifications for the job. But as you can see, there wasn't like a thorough application process for any of these jobs. They weren't like interviewing people, and they weren't having to, manipulate the situation where, their relative was higher up on the sort of recruitment list. It was just a case of, okay, you know this person, and based on sort of the recommendation system, based on I know this person or whatever, they were able to just like sort of kind of fast track and get themselves in those sort of job roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so the movie is like really like scattered with all of these little obstacles that they have to overcome, right? Another one is like this idea of verticality, like of staircases and of levels, right? That the rich live on higher ground, whereas the poor live like physically at the bottom, which on the one hand is a visual metaphor of what's going on, but then also it comes, but also then you have that replicated within the house where parents and children are often separated by the stairs, right? The children are upstairs, the parents are often downstairs, and then in the basement you have the guy who lives in the basement and is living off their scraps, and like an entire person can live in their house and eat their food without them even knowing, right? So, or even like he even was there before them, right? Because he's been there since before they moved in, and they, let's just say in my apartment, if somebody lives in the cupboard, I'm going to notice, right? Because it's just too small. But they have live in such extravagant circumstance that an entire person's life can just happen and they will never know, right? And then that entire thing about the verticality and the stairs comes to a head when the monsoon happens, and the rich families and the poor families' experience of what like a storm is like is completely different, because they not only it's not only just about elevation, it's also about drainage, and like the entire infrastructure is there to reward the rich people and to punish the poor people, right? Because the water ends up at the bottom, because that's kind of what water does. And so for the Kim family, the monsoon is an existential crisis that essentially makes them homeless, and ends up with them spending the night like in an emergency, like you know emergency shelter. Whereas for the rich family, it basically meant just cutting their camping trip short, and they're not happy about it, but it's a minor inconvenience as opposed to an existential threat.
And add that to the literal shit that was like flying up out of the toilet because of the
Yeah.
drainage. It just kind of added to the metaphor there as well.
Yeah, so on that level, like the movie is, I think, is really well constructed, really deliberate, really thoughtful, really nuanced. And then I see things like, oh, this like is about late stage capitalism, and no, not really. Like late stage capitalism means that kind of capitalism is kind of a failing system that's kind of running on fumes, and it's going to collapse at any moment. But that's not what happens in this movie, right? Like this, or it does not say that this is unsustainable what they're doing. Like one of the things that kind of struck me in this movie, and I didn't get on the first viewing, but that kind of clicked into place on the second viewing, is that since we're so used to Western movies, especially American movies, we're used to very specific portrayals of rich people, right? Especially like in the past decade, right? So Exhibit A is that unicorn movie. Yeah, so Death of a Unicorn also has like a very rich family, and they're like complete jerks, right? They're not only out of touch, they're just narcissistic and aloof and just nasty and selfish and greedy. The Parks family is not like this. I mean, like they're a bit clueless, they're a bit spoiled, but broadly they are fairly normal, fairly nice people, right? So like they like the wealth of this family does not come from exploitation. It does not come from scamming somebody. It does not come from directly exploiting somebody. The guy has just a high paying job at like some big company. He's like a graphic designer or something, and he just gets paid a lot, and that's it, right? And as I think the first time I watched this movie, I kept looking for like the proof of why these are bad people, and it never came. And then about halfway into the movie, the Kim Chong Suk, the mother, right, says, "Of course they're nice people. They can afford to be. You need money to be nice." And that is not a sentiment you would get from a Western movie. What
No,
did you
for
think when you saw that scene when the sentiment was expressed? Did you buy it? Were you surprised? Did it come out of left field? What?
yeah, I was trying to like kind of I was trying to understand what she was trying to get at in that, because she has all this money. Well, essentially, it was saying because she has all this money, they don't have like the same level of worries and the same level of stress, so that they're able to just be nice because they're comfortable. Again, it comes with sort of the fact that being poorer means life's a little bit more stressful. You're more stressed about many different things, so you're a little bit less nicer. And I don't think that's true, because you have good and bad people on both sides of the class system, whether you're poor or whether you're rich. But I think this movie actually, for me anyways, showed a little bit more of a, not darker side, but a little bit more of a crabs in a bucket type mentality between the poorer people, especially when you get to the Parasite family and the Basement family. And sorry to call them that, I'm not good with the names, but they have an opportunity where they've each discovered a secret about each other, and instead of working together to try to maintain this lifestyle that they've both attained for themselves, where this family have this kind of increase in money and increase of wealth, because they've all managed to get they've all managed to leech off of the rich family, and her taking care of her husband who's in the basement, who she's been doing that for the past however many years, instead of recognizing that they're both almost like feeding off of the host, and they're both feeding off of the host and benefiting from it, they kind of look at it as they both can't have it, and they essentially fight each other for who remains essentially in the household, and who remains as I'm gonna keep using the movie reference here, but who remains as the single parasite host to the rich family, as opposed to coming to some type of agreement where they can both take care of each other and they all win, essentially. And that kind of speaks to a crabs in the bucket mentality, where you're instead of instead of working together to attain the wealth that you both desire, or to put yourself, or attain the goals that you want, you're doing stuff to spite others, and you're being selfish about it. And there's even that comment where the father made, father the parasite family's father made, where he had like a moment of reflection about the previous driver and what he was up to and what he was doing, and they were like, oh, maybe he's got another job, he's young, and this and the other. But then the daughter says, "Oh, like who cares about him?" Essentially, like look at the situation that we was in. Who cared about us? And like now, this is essentially about us. Like we don't care about anyone else. So it kind of speaks to just that whole mindset of everyone out for themselves and not really working together. And if they did work together, you would be able to help each other out to reach what you wanted to reach, and reach something like that, the money and the wealth that you wanted to attain. And again, you probably won't attain the full wealth of the family, but you each have enough there to sustain, what you initially wanted. Essentially, I'm kind of effing up that last part, but yeah.
Yeah, I see it as less crabs in a bucket. I mean, that is there, right? But I see it as more of a scarcity issue, where they have so much to lose if this goes wrong, and they threaten each other about it, right? Like about exposing each other and kicking each other out, and both of them kind of have this idea that the other family can screw them over, and if they do, they will lose everything, and they will very likely not get a second chance like this. So this is existential, right? Like this is something where they cannot afford to be nice, right? Like two rich families would kind of maybe negotiate, and the one who loses is still rich, right? Maybe a little bit less rich or misses out on some opportunity or something, but it wouldn't be existential, right? And so they would negotiate, and they would maybe be more cooperative about it, possibly, because they have more to gain from cooperating. Whereas here they have everything to lose from the other person turning them in. So that's kind of how I pictured it. So it's about scarcity more than anything else.
Yeah, I think crabs in the bucket was probably the wrong term on my side, but I was trying to think of like the right saying for it whilst kind of just rambling on.
Yeah, I think crabs in the bucket refers to more like people holding each other back. Like somebody is not allowed to succeed because other people would rather see you not succeed than, like, they would rather keep you at their level as opposed to being happy that you succeeded at something. I think that's what I would associate with crabs in the bucket, and I don't think
Yeah,
that's happening here. But I think
yeah,
we're
no,
talking about
agree.
the same thing. So one of the things I've been going on about in various videos is the idea that good movies tend to change the rules at the 50% mark. And this is where I first experienced this, because this one has such a stark and drastic shift at the 50% mark, which is when the two families kind of find out about each other, and they're in this showdown in the abandoned house, and the rich family could come back at any moment, right? So and that involves it being revealed that there's been somebody living in the basement, which I think is not foreshadowed at all. I think like even in two viewings, I've not picked up on anything. One thing that does happen is that a lot of the time the camera will be centered on the staircase that leads down into the basement, and like two people are talking in the foreground, but there's space in between them, and that is filled by the staircase. So if you know what's coming, there's a little bit of foreshadowing, but I don't think it's ever foreshadowed that there is in fact somebody. Right? There's like food doesn't go missing, or people don't hear stuff at night, or like you could have sprinkled things throughout the first half of the movie where in hindsight you say, that's the guy in the basement.
There's only one instance of it, and it's when the father of the rich family is talking about how they had to get rid of the previous housemaid, and he was saying, and he made like a comment about, oh, she was a bit greedy anyway. She always ate like she was eating for two people, and I think that's the only one that I remember vividly being a reference to someone being in the basement. Of course, you kind of like brush it off when you're watching it because you don't really expect it. You're kind of like taking it as he's making an offhanded comment about her, but actually, like that's the only one that I can remember, anyways, that refers to someone potentially being in the basement or someone else being there.
Yeah, he says it about the housekeeper,
Yeah, and yeah, he says it about the housekeeper, but she's the one that's getting the extra food to feed her husband in the basement.
but she claims at least that she always bought his food with her own money, like at one point. So I guess so.
She
That would be interesting if
did
that
she?
is a lie. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So basic, so something like the Kim mom basically during the big showdown, she says something like, "Oh, you're like you know better than us. You're also stealing from them," and then the housekeeper says, "No, I always bought his food with my own money," and kind of left it for him to find, right? Which may like sounds now like it's a lie, like it's a rationalization.
yeah, it could be. It could be rationalization. It could be. Well, she left it. She left it for him to find, as in she left it in the house for him to
As in
find.
she
She
bought
read
food
that.
for him from outside and then left it where he would find it, and that is how he like that's how he ate. He did not steal from the fridge. That's what she claims,
Okay.
at least. Now she may be
Yeah,
lying,
but
or she may be.
but I was gonna, but I was gonna say there was an instance with the young boy where he was eating cake late at night, and then he essentially caught him coming up the stairs, and that's when he had that traumatic incident where his like eyes were back, and the whole episode with him started essentially. So that would indicate that he actually was in fact coming up and taking food or stealing food, or she was like helping him in certain ways, or they weren't. And maybe she was still buying food for him with her money, but there was still a line being crossed on his part where he was coming out of the basement during the nighttime.
Yeah, it's possible. But but I think the movie is meticulous enough that that contradiction means something. That either she is lying, or I don't know what. Like why would Mr. Park lie, right? Like he would just notice that more food was going missing essentially. So what's his agenda here? But what I was building up to is like how did you experience this twist, like this twist in the middle, where the movie kind of turns into a completely different movie and this big revelation happens?
Yeah, I think it definitely upped the tension in the movie for sure. Because again, it seemed like everything was going fine with the family. At first, I was like, oh, they might recognize that. They look a little bit similar, or they have some resemblance or something like that, and that's how they might start to pick up on the fact that this family isn't who they're saying they are. But that twist completely threw me for a loop. I didn't see it coming at all. And I think this is, and again, I said I think I preferred the first part of the movie more than the second part. And it was just because there was just the way that things were playing out. I just found a little bit annoying and a little bit cartoonish sometimes as well. Like for example, when the Parasite family's mother is, you know, has gone down to the basement and they're talking about the situation. She's and the basement woman, the housekeeper, she's like pleading about not telling on her husband down there, and then the rest of the Parasite family are like on the stairs, and then they all trip and fall over, and then she sees them, and then obviously like the tables turn. I get that the housekeeper needed to find out about the other family, but I just didn't like the way it was done. It just felt a bit too cartoonish for me, which was really frustrating. And there was
This
other
might be so.
instances.
This might
Huh?
have something to do with you not having seen very many Asian movies, because this kind of slapstick is kind of common in Asian movies in general. So, for instance, that scene where so there's kind of like when the two families find out about each other, the housekeeper and the basement guy win, right? And then it cuts to the Kims kneeling on the floor with raised arms, right? And the other family is on the couch. The wife is giving the guy a massage while quoting, not like impersonating North Korean propaganda, and they are holding the phone up, talking about how it's like a North Korean missile pointed at the Kims because with a push of a button they can destroy their lives. Is that what you meant by a bit cartoonish?
Not that well, not that part. Essentially, I mean that was like an element of it, but I will appreciate that there are obviously like cultural differences. So there's like nuances that I probably like skipped over, and you know, the steps of comedy being one of them.
It's more like that whole a little bit exaggerated demeanor, and like people like having very exaggerated emotions and so on. Like that is something that happens a lot in Asian movies, and it feels a bit weird, and it feels a bit stilted when you are coming from Western movies, I think. But yeah, like that part kind of that's just how it goes.
To be fair, I don't think I felt the heightened emotions too much in this. I wouldn't say it was a heightened emotions. It was just more the slapstick side of things. So like the falling down the stairs. It was also the way that they were like going about and hiding around the house, and I think that was more frustration as to you're making the dumb decisions each and every time. And I felt it was a bit contrived as well at certain times about how things are playing out. So, like for example, the parents deciding to sleep on the sofa randomly when it wasn't like a common behavior that they did. It was also the boy radioing just as the father was coming out from underneath the table and stuff like that. I was a bit like, okay, like you're doing this to purposely add some level of attention, and it wasn't working for me because it was a bit too forced, I would say.
And it's also a very different feel in the first half. The first half is very grounded, very subdued, right? And then it gets increasingly wacky in the second half, which I guess didn't work for you.
Not completely. I'm not going to say it didn't work at all, but it just kind of brought the movie down a little bit from I was having such a great time with the first half of the movie, and then I was like, okay, this is good, and I'm just like now seeing how the rest of the movie plays out, and I feel like I'm like that with and I don't think it's just this movie. I feel like I'm like that with a lot of movies where I really do like the setup, I really do like the story that's playing out at the start. And it could be like an action movie, for example, and then it kind of turns into focusing more on the action side of things. And I'm just like, okay, not really having as much fun as I was, when we were setting things up, when we were setting up the story. I was going to say prime example is Jurassic World, but I didn't like anything about Jurassic World at all. To be fair, the story or the setup or the sort of dinosaur action at the end of it. But I think it's just like anytime it kind of leans into its more sort of like actiony, like not. I mean, in this movie it wasn't action, but when it leans in this movie, it leans more into like the wackiness and like silliness, and it starts kind of like playing out some like the tension scenes and stuff like that. That's when I just kind of retract a little bit from the movie. I'm like, okay, it's still good, but it's not what I'm here for.
Speaking about exaggerated and wacky, like towards the ending, it kind of gets more and more intense, right? So, what did you think of like the final sequence? It's not quite the final sequence, but like that whole the birthday party and the killing spree, and when the dad has to go into hiding and stuff like that. What was your thought on that?
Yeah, that was another. That was another one where I was be like, okay, we've just like we've created a scenario where the final scene is going to play out. So I was be like, okay, like let's see how it unfolds. I thought it was okay. It kind of happened. No, I wouldn't say it happened all too quickly, but I was a bit like, okay, I don't know. I think I was a bit underwhelmed. Is what I'd say. I don't think I was like super impressed with the ending of it. I was a bit shocked that he stabbed the daughter and the daughter died. That for sure I was shocked by. And I actually liked that whole element of he hit sort of the main guy over the head with the rock, but he didn't die. And I was a bit confused as to why he didn't die first. But then another kind of like detail that I like picked up after the movie from like reading stuff was just about like the rock and like its hollowness and the fact that when there was a monsoon it floated and it shouldn't have floated if it was an actual rock. So there was kind of something up with that rock, so it wasn't an actual properly formed rock, which is why he was able to survive that. But I
I
think I
didn't
think
pick
I
up
was
on that.
just
It's I didn't pick up on that.
so
So I don't know the symbolism of the rock, right? It's got some kind of cultural significance, and they talk about it when the friend drops it off at the Kims, right? And I'll be honest, I have no idea what this is, right? Like, but it seems to be some kind of a traditional thing, and it's certainly very expensive, right? Like, but it also looks very heavy. So I'm surprised that you say it's hollow, because, and I don't remember it floating.
like in the monsoon. So like that's like one of the things that when they were like rummaging through this stuff, he was it like kind of like was raised above like the ground level. And again, I just like I need to
Okay.
double check that on the second viewing. But they also referenced it on the dream sequence as well. Because was it a dream sequence? Well, I mean, I think there was like a whole debate of whether he was actually dreaming or whether the ending actually happened when he actually buys a house. But when he places the
That
rock
is
in the
that is a
water,
fantasy.
yeah,
That is a
and that
fantasy, definitely.
yeah, and in that when he places the rock in the lake or wherever he places it, the rock actually sinks in that particular scene compared to sort of the monsoon scene. So that again wasn't a detail that I picked out, but it was just like I was just doing some extra reading, and it was like an extra thing that I picked out. And I think the whole element of it was this rock was meant to bring wealth and fortune and stuff to the family. And I think where it pointed it out was that things started to go wrong when he threw the rock at the guy that was pissing outside of their apartment, and then that's when the whole plan and everything that they had going on started to unravel. So again, I don't know 100% the cultural aspect of it and cultural relevancy of it, but it was just like an interesting detail that was pointed out. In regards to the ending, I don't think I have like four, and maybe I need to like sit with it a little bit longer and properly think about it. But the whole time I was a bit like, okay, this is a bit underwhelming. Like he's like the daughter's died, he stabbed the father, and then that guy's died, and it was just like all kind of like really fast paced. And I was like trying to see the meaning and trying to find the understanding behind it. And I know the father had the whole spiel about nothing really matters, and there's like no point in having a plan because if you don't have a plan, you will never be disappointed. And also the whole element of nothing really matters. Like I could kill someone and like what really matters. So I know that there was a whole spiel, but I just kind of maybe missed the understanding and missed the relevance of the ending.
Yeah, like to me, even having seen it twice, it seems like it unravels a little bit, right? There's pieces in it which are very clear, right? So for instance, when the daughter and the son both get stabbed, the the Parks could very easily take both of them to the hospital, right? Their car is big enough, they're right there, but they're not. They still view the Kims as servants, right? And their perspective does not exist to them. They don't even have contempt for them, they just don't exist, right? And that is why he insists that Mr. Kim throws him the keys, which then lands under the basement guy. So now Mr. Park has to confront the reality of what was happening when previously he has been ignoring him or like everything that was going on, but now he cannot help but engage with it because he has to physically go through him to get to the keys. So there's stuff like that there. But that is one aspect where I think the metaphor works really well. But in terms of like why this escalates kind of in this violence, I guess it has to do with people being pushed too far. With Mr. Kim, there's definitely the thing about this whole idea of the smell, right? Like that no matter what he does, no matter how professional he is, no matter how good he is, he will always be, you know, the working class guy, right? Who smells bad because he has to take the subway. And the Parks are just casually like just bigoted against them because of this, right? Because they smell bad. That that is certainly there, and he certainly gets pushed too far at that point, and the stress of the situation kind of gets him to throw caution to the wind and just lash out, which I guess has to do with like people can only take so much, and there's no, you know, I'm not sure how to say it. People can only take so much, and it's not like there's anything else they could do because they're just being ignored anyway, right? So there's stuff like that certainly going on there.
Yeah, no, and when you kind of say that, I can definitely see it, especially with
There's
the
like
father of the.
there's like three surnames in Korea. Like you could learn them.
That sounds a bit on the line. That sounds a bit on the line.
Do you know
Uh,
why? Do you know why all Koreans have the same
no,
surname?
wait, is that actually a thing?
So
Like,
it's like 80% of Koreans have like four surnames or something like that. So that's why Kim Park, Lee, and I think there's one other. Like almost all Koreans have the surname. The reason is that traditionally in Korea people didn't use surnames, but in like 200 years ago or 300 years ago, an emperor said everybody needs to get a surname, and almost every like people just picked a name, like for their families, because they had to have one, but there was no real rhyme or reason. And so they picked just famous figures and emperors that they liked. And most people kind of picked Kim, Park, and I think there's two others. And that is why, like, but it's not like everybody who's named Kim is related, but it's like a whole bunch of people picked Kim because that was a popular emperor like 300 years ago when everybody had to pick a surname. That is why there are four surnames in Korea.
Good bit of history knowledge there, and I can only imagine how much confusion that must cause, because
Mhm.
how do you know who you're related to, and how do you not? How do you know who you're not? I guess obviously through conversation, but I mean it's just that's an extra step to try and figure out who you know and who you don't know.
Yeah. So how did we get to this?
I think I was rambling about the fathers, but I didn't. Again, I was saying I didn't know each of the names, and you were like, "There's only four."
So I do think the ending is kind of seems to kind of unravel a little bit. And then we have the whole thing about the fantasy of buying the house, right? So the father goes into hiding because he has no way out in the system, right? There's nowhere else for him to go, and he knows where to hide, and he kind of just slots into that like that role. And the son then fantasizes about one day buying back the house and releasing his father, although that would not mean that he's free. It just means he can come out, interact with them. He would still be wanted for murder, right? I'm not sure how, like this movie is full of really well constructed metaphors. Just as a quick detour, did you pick up on the thing about the noodles? Because I didn't on my first watch, and then I kind of looked it up after the second one, and so and it's fascinating. It's almost my favorite metaphor in all of fiction now.
Yeah, I actually didn't pick it up when I first watched it, but I did read about it as well. And are you referring to the fact that the noodles is a dish that both the rich and the poor eat, but for the mother to kind of distinguish herself from the poor, she added the steak to it to make it a little bit more luxury. Is that
I
what
don't
you're
think
referring
that's what
to?
it is. I don't think that I'm talking about that about the noodles, but I don't think that is what's happening. What's happening is that so it's called ramdon in this, and I don't that's not the proper name. Like that dish has a different name in Korea. But what it's basically is it's taking the two very popular types of instant noodles, and you kind of make a stir fry with them. So the noodles are the cheapest of the cheap, right? This is like student food, right? Like you can make like a bowl of this dish for no money at all because it's the cheapest instant noodles that you can get anywhere, right? And then so the parks are coming back from the camping trip, and they're 8 minutes away, right? And so they call ahead and ask Mrs. Kim to make them this dish because it's easy to make and quick to make. But they also have some sirloin steak in the fridge, so can she just throw that in? Now, it's not about snobbery. It's not about making it special. I think it's the exact opposite because in the subtitles, this is referred to as sirloin steak. But if you dig into it a little bit, this is actually like high end, fancy Korean beef. Like if you've heard of Wagyu beef, which is Japanese, which is one of the most expensive types of beef you can get, this is fancier. So they have essentially like the most elitist and expensive and exclusive food you can possibly have in Korea. They have it lying in their fridge, and they are throwing it in with these cheap instant noodles because the kid likes it, and then the kid doesn't even eat it, and then Mrs. Park kind of just eats it casually, like she's based like this probably costs like there's probably $100 of beef in there or something like that. And she just casually eats some of it and then kind of puts it away, not acknowledging the value of the food and not acknowledging the work that went into it. Actually, it doesn't even register what it took to make this. And on top of that, you have the contrast between the extremely cheap ingredients and the extremely expensive ingredients, kind of just thrown in there with no distinction made. That is kind of what's going on with this noodle dish. And so it's like this complete juxtaposition of money and value and how oblivious the rich family is to it. And then on top of that, also, the work that went into making it because somebody else made it for them, of course, right? So that is kind of like my favorite like it's just a pitch perfect metaphor like for the entire movie, right? Because it is not just about inequality. It is not just about like being exploited. Like nobody's being exploited here exactly, right? Like they're not very nice about it, asking the housekeeper to make the dish, right? But it's kind of still her job. Like so, like they're not complete. Like they're rude about it and they're entitled about it, but it's they're not out of line in terms of what they're asking. They're just completely oblivious about what goes into it, and they have no perception of anything outside their immediate concern. So that's kind of why this works as a metaphor, and that is why I think it's like a microcosm of the entire movie.
I would say that that explanation works a lot better than what I'd read and what I'd seen online. To be fair,
Yeah,
come to you.
people have a tendency to kind of run with this stuff in this movie, and a lot of the time they're kind of projecting their own thing into it. But I think what this movie is actually saying about, yeah, like about how kind of wealth kind of twists your perception of things, and how the world just looks completely differently based on whether or not you have money. That's much more interesting than just rich people bad. And it's kind of what we're used to from movies like this, and that's kind of why I like this metaphor so much. It's because it's not actually saying that, right? It's not like it is saying something a little bit more nuanced and sophisticated than just rich people bad.
No, agreed, agreed. Is there anything else we wanted to touch on?
I was just doing a quick detour because of how, like, because we were talking about metaphors, but just the very ending of it. It's basically like this. I'm not sure how, like, to me, I care a lot about endings. I care a lot about kind of the ending is kind of the punchline of the joke. It's kind of the exclamation mark at the end. And so it ends basically on the family having lost the daughter, and the father, is lost to them as well, right? Because he's in hiding. First of all, the hiding part, like logically in terms of each individual step in the plot, I understand why it's happening. I'm not sure how it fits into kind of the broader metaphor, because like the previous basement guy was hiding from loan sharks, right? So he borrowed money he couldn't pay back, and so he was hiding from that. So that was kind of self-inflicted. Whereas, and here, then Mr. Kim is hiding from like justice, right? He did in fact kill. He's not being accused of something he didn't do, right? He's hiding from justice in a way, which I think is a little bit of a different context. But it's well, you know what I mean. I don't quite, I haven't quite. It doesn't quite sing in my head yet. Like I suppose, like how this fits into the broader message of the movie, other than it is possible for him to hide because of how extravagant this house is. But that's kind of it.
Yeah, I don't know, because I was like kind of thinking of along the lines of, the sum of your life choices means you end up, I don't know, like stuck in that
Yeah,
position if you haven't been able to find your way out. And then you have the son that's fantasizing. You have the son that's dreaming about going to school, getting his education, getting a good job, and being able to afford a house like that. But maybe in
which he
reality,
never
he
will.
just ends up, yeah. And then in reality, he just ends up like his father, stuck in the basement, stuck in that position in society, and not able to progress or not able to find his way out. And again, the whole like element of the ladder is that, or the stairs, is that sometimes you'll be able to get a taste of the better life, of something a little bit better than what you're used to, but eventually you always have to go back down the stairs and, like, live in your reality essentially. So that's the only thing that kind of comes into mind when sort of trying to attach anything to that.
Yeah, and there's also the question of whether he could have ended up anywhere else, right? Like if he actually did have options, if he did have a choice, or whether he was being railroaded into this kind of impossible situation in the first place. Yeah, so that is something I need to think about a little bit more. Most of the metaphor in this is very not necessarily obvious, but it's like very finely crafted, and it makes a lot of sense. And this is the one part where I say I'm not entirely sure about this.
Last thoughts. Is this the greatest movie of the 21st century? I think that question is very subjective. I think it's very much down to individual and personal taste. So whoever put it at the top of their best movie list for the times, fair play to them. It's their prerogative to do that. For me, it's definitely high up there. It's definitely one of the better movies that I've seen, both in terms of its storytelling and both in terms of its messaging as well. But just in terms of personal preference, personal feel, I wouldn't say it's the greatest movie of the 21st century. For me, anyways, I think I definitely have a lot of other movies that I would enjoy a lot more. I think this movie probably would get better with a second viewing, where you're able to pick up more of the nuances once you know how the story plays out, once you know how it comes together. I think it probably gets a lot better, on second viewing. And there might come a point in time where I do give it a second viewing just to kind of see, if there's any clues, if there's any hidden messages or hidden, if there's any foreshadowing for what's to come in the movie at all early on. But I think this was it's actually a really enjoyable experience actually watching this. It's always good to get a fresh perspective on some of these like social issues, which again, it's commonplace around the world. It's things that are felt all over the globe, and just to see how it's portrayed and see how it's understood through different society and different cultures is always fascinating. So it's interesting to see. So I appreciate it for that as well. So I think overall, I'd give it a I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think we drop a few points just on the latter half of the movie and the ending, and it just not being completely for me. But I think the whole setup of it, characters are great, metaphors, themes, symbolisms, all great in this movie, and it's just some of the and again, I think that's just cultural differences on that part. But yeah, I think very enjoyable movie, 8.5 out of 10 for me.
I'm not sure about best movie of the century so far. I think it's a really good one. I think it's well constructed, it's well acted, it's well shot, well written, all of it. Like all of it is firing on all cylinders. Ending, not entirely sure about that, but definitely a lot of care and craft and effort went into it. It's also really refreshing when considering all the polemics we've been getting from Western movies in the last 10 years, where like when a movie presents itself as being about topics like this, that's already a reason for me to kind of go in a different direction because I just expect just dumb stuff, right? And this movie shows that no, actually, if you actually do try and if you actually do put some thought into it, you can actually craft a good story that makes these points and that kind of explores these ideas through character actions and through that are supported by metaphors and all of that and allegories and whatever else, but it doesn't have to just be stupid, and you can and the more effort you put into that stuff, the more compelling it is, right? So it is on that level kind of refreshing. So good movie, even great, not sure about the best.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. If you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for working with us. Of course, as always, we appreciate your support. And if you liked everything that you had today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Bye bye.